Hey folks, it's Ardwulf. Welcome. Today we're going to have a sort of nostalgic look back at an item from my childhood, or at least teenage years. And it is not the game Conquistador, although Conquistador is another one of those things. I had this game. This is, of course, a Richard Berg game. It originally appeared in S&T magazine, eventually made its way to Avalon Hill. I had reasons that I wanted to regain the Avalon Hill edition as opposed to the SPI edition, which I've gone into elsewhere. I found a copy in great shape on eBay. It's got the original Avalon Hill dice, a little bit musty. It's got unpunched counters. But one of the things that was in it that I didn't necessarily expect to see was this vintage Avalon Hill catalog. Now, of course, there's like a small little digest size Avalon Hill catalog that a lot of people probably have copies of floating around, and I have copies floating around too, but this was the one, I think, because it's like full color 32-page whatever book. This was the one that really stuck in my memory, and I haven't had one of these since I got rid of those early games, which was, many years ago at this point. This thing showed up in Conquistador. I want to say this is late 80s production, something like that, maybe early 90s, something like that. But this is, a very interesting piece. So, big catalog, full color. It's all. We're going to take a look at it. It's pretty neat. Full game catalog featuring battle, fantasy, historical, SF, role-playing, simulation, adventure, educational, sports, leisure time, and microcomputer games. I won't have something to say about all these things, but I will have something to say about a decent amount of them. There's this cute little introduction about Wargames, what Wargames are. That's neat, although that's only like the first, almost half the book. Starts with Tactics 2. The original, of course, Tactics 1 was the original commercial tabletop wargame, board wargame anyway. Tactics 2, designed by Charles S. Roberts, the founder of Avalon Hill, was the successor game to that and was available well into the 90s, I think. We have the classics. This is an interesting selection in itself here. We have Waterloo, Afrika Korps, Stalingrad, and D-Day. I'm going to guess that of these four, probably the one that's most worth a look nowadays is probably Afrika Korps. That is a game that you can get without spending a ton of money. It'll probably be in thoroughly played condition because that's what happened to these things. Another thing that's interesting here are the complexity ratings. Avalon Hill used a scale of 1 to 10. And surprisingly, I have talked in the past about the games that they rated really high. I don't think rate quite as high anymore, but the same thing applies on the other end, as it turns out. Some of these games that they rate 1s and 2s, I think, are a little more complicated than that. Afrika Korps would be one example. Certainly not a complicated game, but I'd probably put it at a 3. Midway is a 3. Victory in the Pacific is a 2. I'd rate Victory in the Pacific higher than a 2, and I've played that. War at Sea. Is it a little bit simpler than Victory in the Pacific? Yes. Pretty much the same game system, but not that much simpler. 1776, complexity rating 7. I don't think it's a 7 nowadays. I think it's about a 5. Again, these are all arbitrary things. Caesar at Alicia, which is a game that a lot of people have fond memories of. Caesar's Legions, which is a game I rarely hear mentioned nowadays. Alexander, which is a game about the Battle of Gaugamela, designed by Gary Gygax. And, of course, S. Craig Taylor's Wooden Ships and Iron Men, one of the games they picked up from Battle Line. It is a fantastic game, and to some, it is still the definitive Age of Sail game. War and Peace, of course, we've talked about this on the recent show with Dan. Chancellorsville, I was quite surprised to see this in this catalog, because I didn't think this, look at this box, right? This is a box from the 60s. I didn't think this game was available for this long. On the other hand, it's not a well-regarded game, so they may just have had copies sitting around since the 60s. Napoleon, this is early block war game. This came out of Columbia Games, or Gamma 2. Eventually got picked up by Avalon Hill, and now back with Columbia Games, which is still around, of course. Ricky's War is a classic. Ricky's War and or Luftwaffe. A lot of people's early wargaming experiences were formed by those two games. Jutland, which is sort of a miniatures game, a miniatures-esque game anyway. Bismarck, which is one that I've always kind of wanted to play. You can see a successor to Bismarck in the Avalanche Press Second World War at Sea, Great War at Sea series. Submarine, be interested to see that, actually. Anzio, Air Assault on Crete's kind of a classic mini monster type game. Some people would consider it an actual monster. Russian Campaign, of course, this is a game we're still dealing with the legacy of Russian Campaign as we see a new take on Russian Campaign. Russian Campaign done right comes out every couple of years, and sometimes those are even called Russian Campaign. Not to denigrate it, it's a classic game that we're people are still playing Russian Campaign for that reason. Tobruk, I don't think anybody's playing Tobruk now, but there is the advanced Tobruk system from Critical Hit, which some people do like, and I don't have any real information on, and I'm confused by their website. Blitzkrieg is another one of those tactics style non-historical hex and counter war games. It's just in some kind of generic land. Of course, Panzer Blitz, Panzer Leader, and the third game in the sort of troika here, the Arab-Israeli Wars, also uses essentially the same system. Panzer Blitz, of course, is East Front, Panzer Leader is West Front, and oddly enough, Arab-Israeli Wars covers the Arab-Israeli Wars. Classic Squad Leader, still available at this time. This is pre-ASL, Crescendo of Doom, Cross of Iron, the expansions. I don't see GI Anvil of Victory, so this catalog presumably predates the third Classic Squad Leader expansion. And they're giving Squad Leader an 8, Cross of Iron a 9, and Crescendo of Doom a 10, which is interesting. One of the classic 10s is Third Reich, right? This specific game. I don't think anybody puts it at a 10 out of 10 complexity rating anymore, unless they're just not used to war games. That's plausible. I think it's like a 6 or 7 now. It was considered super complicated at the time. There are now many examples of games that are at least as complicated. Origins of World War II. This is a very early 70s or maybe even late 60s Jim Dunnigan design. It's an interesting game. I think Stuka Joe has done some video on it. It's a very interesting game. I think probably could have... I can't really criticize it for having insufficient development. How do you even develop a game like that in the early 70s or late 60s or whenever that came out? And nevertheless, I think it's a game that's way ahead of its time. And I think it has some interesting things to say to us even now. We have Diplomacy. We have the classic Longest Day big monster game with however many amount of boards this is. Classic D-Day game. A lot of counter sheets, a lot of boards, a lot of weird symbols. Use the historical symbols. Very hard to parse that. Magic Realm. I had remembered this as complexity 10, but apparently that's not the case. It's complexity 9. Dune, I'd say, is higher than a complexity 3. This is a fabulous game, by the way. It is currently available in a new edition from Cubicle 7. No, from... I can never remember the name of the publisher because they have a number in their name, and I can't remember the name of it. Anyway, if you look it up, you'll be able to find it. This game is worth your time. It is a multiplayer game, so it's kind of hard to arrange. You also don't know how long it's going to take to play. It could be done in under an hour. Could take 5 or 6 hours to play. It's hard to say. Wizard's Quest. This was another one that I was always interested in seeing. UFO. Don't know anybody that ever played that. A lot of folks have fond memories of Starship Troopers, though. And I had Starship Troopers at one point. Don't remember playing it. Doesn't mean I didn't. Air Force and its expansion, Dauntless. These were additional pickups from Battle Line. I think Battle Line packaged them slightly differently. I have just acquired these as of in the last year or two, and I look forward to getting them to a table at some point. Circus Maximus, a game about chariot racing. A lot of people say this is a blast to play, and looking at it, I am prepared to agree with them. Here is my copy of Circus Maximus, also just obtained in the last year or so. Fury in the West. Interesting because this was one of the Battle Line pickups, but Battle Line put it in the big flat box. Avalon Hill, same with Air Force. Avalon Hill put it in a conventional bookcase box. This is a game about the Battle of Shiloh. And I've heard good things about it. But I'm not sure, I'm not sure I would enjoy it. Struggle of Nations. This is a Kevin Zucker design. It's part of the Campaigns of Napoleon series, and it is the oddball in that series. It has super tiny hexes and super tiny rectangular counters that occupy 2 hexes at a time. It is odd. I think Kyle Seeley has done some video on it, so if you are interested in Struggle of Nations, check that out. And this is the Leipzig campaign that culminates in the battle at Leipzig, called the Battle of Nations in some places. Civilization, of course, this is a classic. This, with its companion game, Advanced Civilization, which I don't see in here, is a great game. I wouldn't play Civilization without Advanced Civilization. Of course, there are successor games out now. The current successor games are Western Empires, and I think there's an Eastern Empires coming. Storm over Arnhem, this is the first of the Area Impulse games. This is still getting played today. It's very well remembered. Panzer Army Africa, if I'm not mistaken, was one that came out of SPI and S&T. And I don't hear a lot about that game anymore. Gunslinger, Gilbert Collins has done a video on Gunslinger, and I always thought it looked neat. It is essentially Boot Hill, without pretending to be a role-playing game as Boot Hill did. It's if you are super into Old West gunfights, you might be into it, but I suspect most people probably aren't these days. It's nevertheless neat. Freedom in the Galaxy, basic game 4, intermediate game 7, advanced game 10. Again, I think there's plenty of games more complicated than that now. This is a great classic. Don't have mine within reach, and mine is an SPI edition anyway these days. This is another SPI acquisition. It is very much Star Wars with the serial numbers filed off, but filed off in a competent way. In that they actually develop a quite nice little background to play this revolt against the Galactic Empire in. It's quite a neat game, and it's actually one of the highest rated SPI titles on Board Game Geek for whatever reason. I was surprised to see that. This is Battle of the Bulge. I assume this is the version of Battle of the Bulge that was redone in the 80s, so it's not the same as what's called Bulge 65. This was in a flat box. I've never played this, but this is a very important game in the history of wargaming. Again, I don't know about this edition, but Bulge 65 is a very important game in the history of wargaming, and even this 80s edition eventually led to things like Bitter Woods and thence to Time for Trumpets and stuff like that. Here's Flat Top. Again, another Battle Line acquisition. This is a fantastic game that I cannot recommend highly enough. Unfortunately, copies of it are expensive, and if they are not expensive, they are usually in absolutely ghastly condition. Flat Top is one of these games that you were never going to, if you punched a single counter out of it, you were never going to get it all back in the box without wrecking the box, unfortunately. But for all that, it's a wonderful game that I highly recommend. There is a lot of paperwork. If you're averse to paperwork, you might object to that, but I don't mind that, and I think Flat Top is wonderful. Down with the King. Never played this. This is another interesting looking fantasy type game. Guns of August. This is the game that I think a lot of folks, me included, and I have a copy of this, actually sitting on the shelf behind me. A lot of people have fond memories of Guns of August, and I do too, but I think it's the game that ruined World War I war games for a whole generation of wargamers. It is a very slow-moving, grindy game that is not inappropriate for what it covers at the scale that it is covering it, but it nevertheless makes it probably not a lot of fun to play, and it takes an awfully long time. Playing time 4 hours and up, for the campaign, you're looking at a 50-hour grinding game. It's not a ton of fun. Amoeba Wars, no idea. Interesting and colorful looking board, I'll tell you that. Here's a little section in the middle where Avalon Hill try and innovate. Puzzle sticks. They're just puzzles with all the pieces of these rectangular pieces, and then they turn these into games too. I don't remember any of these. Here we start getting into their non-war games. Titan is a wonderful game, co-designed by the legendary David Trampier, one of the early D&D artists, one of the best of the early D&D artists. Tragically no longer with us, and even more tragically got out of fantasy art for many, many years. Slapshot, one of the many Avalon Hill sports games. The Legend of Robin Hood and Little Round Top. This Little Round Top was, I think, originally called 20th Maine and appeared from OSG. And these were in these little sort of thin 1-inch digest-sized boxes. Avalon Hill did a number of those. Now so these are brand new. So I guess this catalog sounds like an 81 catalog. Dragon Hunt, GI Anvil of Victory, and Squad Leader Trilogy in a 3-game library pack with protective sleeve. That's interesting. I'd love to see that. Imagine that's worth a giant pile of money. The General. Here's, of course, the magazine that Avalon Hill had been producing since the 60s. Here's some accessories, including Coral Sea variant for Midway, Kingmaker variant event cards, presumably the extension map for Civilization was probably on this list at some point as well. Here's the whole line of Sports Illustrated games. Auto racing, boat racing, more auto racing, horse racing, basketball, football, baseball. And not even that. More basketball, more football, more baseball. They had multiples of these. More baseball, boxing, more football, pro golf. God, how boring. I mean, you know, I'm Mr. Boring Games, right? But no thanks. They had a magazine for this too, this All-Star Replay, which I've never seen a copy of. A couple of interesting little card games, Black Spy and Bali. Rail Baron, which is a rail game. Acquire, which I have and which I've never played. Looks actually kind of fun. Outdoor Survival, which is a sort of unintended classic. For those who don't know, the original little white box edition of D&D, in lieu of including rules for doing things outside, said go get yourself a copy of Avalon Hill's Outdoor Survival. That turned this into one of Avalon Hill's top sellers. It is otherwise a weird and undistinguished game, I believe. Hexagony and Feudal, not interested in those at all. Source of the Nile is a game that you'd not probably see produced in the same form today. It is a game about colonialism, but it doesn't, of course, know that it's a game about colonialism. Deluxe Triples, no clue. Twixt, Intern, no idea. A lot of the early Avalon Hill non-war games are not in this catalog. Moonstar. This is some kind of new agey thing, or memory game, I don't know. Bureaucracy, it certainly looks bureaucratic looking at the board. Business Strategy and Executive Decision. Stocks and Bonds, the stock market game. Whole pile of business games. More, and here's a couple more. Gold Foreign Exchange. Owari is some kind. There's a name for this Pit and Pebbles type of game that is not Owari. I think that was just Avalon Hill trying to be clever with it. Chess and Go. Why you'd buy those from Avalon Hill, I don't know, but, you know, back in the 80s, the situation was a little bit different. Smokers Wild and Drinkers Wild. Not sure how many of those they sold. These two games, they go out of their way to say they don't support these bad habits. Facts in 5, Shakespeare. That would be intriguing to see. I wonder what that's all about. Image, the Who, What, When, and Where game. The Book of Lists. Point of Law, not the only lawyer simulation that Avalon Hill ever did, by the way. I remember my grade school had a copy of Tough. This is a game with numbered dice, and you do mathematical operations on the dice. Word Power is another educational one. These microcomputer games. Now, a lot of folks had more experience with these than me. As far as I know, the only one of these that I ever played was Telengard, which was what we would today call a roguelike. Meaning it's a mostly text and or text as images type of thing that you kind of delved as deep as you could into the dungeon until you died. A number of these, though, looked interesting to me as a kid. Empire of the Overmind and Planet Miners and this Galaxy. I'm still into Space 4X games, and those games kind of sounded like that. Lords of Carmel sounded interesting. So, neat little look, I think, at an early 80s Avalon Hill full-color game catalog. Really interesting and nostalgic piece for me. I hope that you have gotten some enjoyment out of watching me ramble on this thing. And I certainly have had fun looking at this ancient artifact from the earlier days of a lost and forgotten age. So if you have enjoyed the video, please do give it a thumbs up. Please subscribe to the channel. If you would like to help support Ardwulf's Lair, you can check out the links to the Patreon, the merch store, and the Ko-Fi in the video description. Until next time, thanks for watching and happy wargaming.